everybody? My name is Jasminda. Everybody calls me Yas. Take two. What's up, everybody? My name is Jasminda. Everybody calls me Yas, and welcome to my YouTube channel. I decided to start a reaction channel because it just seemed like a lot of fun to do, and I kind of want to hop on that bandwidth. Don't know why I said bandwidth. I kind of just wanted to hop on that wave because it just seemed like a lot of fun to do and make. And I've been doing a lot of tinkering and a lot of researching. So I just wanted to go ahead and put myself out there. Won't know until you try, right? So let's go ahead and get into this video. The most embarrassing royal deaths of all time by my guys at Chat History. I'm a history buff. I love learning about history. World history, doesn't matter. I love history. I like him specifically because he kind of like explains it at like a 5-year-old level, which is perfect for some people, not me because I'm big brain. So without further ado, let's get into the video.
Embarrassing royal deaths. At just 6 years old, itty-bitty Jimmy II of Scotland was an excited little prince eager to one day inherit the throne from his dear old dad, King James I. And it looks like that day is today.
Dad?
James I was a victim of a coup conducted by his power-hungry uncle who sought to seize the throne. His wife, the Queen, was injured but managed to survive despite being an intended target. Although certainly shaken, she stirred up quite the outcry.
So they was going after her? Why do they always want to kill the women first? I'm offended.
From her Scottish subjects by putting her now very dead husband's corpse on display, and seeing the sheer brutality that had occurred, an all-out manhunt began for the men responsible. And these men were captured and brutally executed. With the old king gone, it was time to crown a new one.
If you see me going, like, looking off to the side, my toddler, she likes to follow me around often, so I'm just trying to make sure she doesn't hurt herself while I'm trying to focus on you guys, because, you know, you guys will be my babies too soon.
Being only 6 at the time of his dad's dastardly demise, Slimmy Jimmy Jr. was crowned on March 27, 1437. But since he couldn't make any sound decisions as a drooling youth, his still-alive mom took power as regent, acting as ruler on James's behalf. But therein lies the problem. See, the people of Scotland are what we call
That is a diabolical picture.
Scottish. The Queen, now ruling over Scotland, hailed from England. You see the problem here. She was promptly pushed from power in favor of someone a bit more Scottish.
Bursting through the door is Archibald Douglas.
He's the king's much older first cousin. He took the job but died a few years later from a fever since there wasn't a cowbell in sight. Power was then passed to these two fine fellows, Lord William Crichton and Sir Alexander Livingston. Their goal was to keep King James safe and in power, but in such a hostile political environment, with all of these seemingly random people trying to do their best to position themselves into more power, sometimes it takes a bit of violence to achieve those goals. The best example of said violence being the infamous Black Dinner.
I do not like that name. I don't like that name, especially for a country who basically had no black people in it. But then again, I think it would be more offensive if there were black people in it. Never mind.
Livingston held a royal dinner at Edinburgh Castle, where the king resided. At the top of the invite list were 16-year-old William Douglas and his 10-year-old brother, David Douglas. They were the sons of former fever-haver Archibald Douglas and a threat to the crown. While downing a hock of ham and a bushel of apples, or whatever they ate in those times, the brothers would soon learn that this dinner would come with a show. In the middle of the meal, a decapitated black bull's head was aggressively slammed onto the table in front of them. Ooh, dessert. Now, apparently having a black bull's bulbous block brutally bashed onto your beautiful buffet was a Scottish nobleman's friendly gesture of impending doom. Despite the young King James's pleas,
Not friendly
the two
gesture.
boys were captured and beheaded right in front of him. This historical power move was the direct inspiration for that red wedding scene in the Game of Thrones.
I was just about to say, this reminds me of the Red Wedding in Game of Thrones. He just said that. There is no need for me to repeat it.
Fast forward through a few years of childhood trauma to 1449, and the now 19-year-old James marries a nice lady named Mary, and she shoots out 7 kids. One of them dies. Very sad, but very typical. With his marriage and coming of age, James's kingship switched from free trial to premium access. However, what was left of those dang Douglases are still fighting to retain power. If only there was a way for a king to take care of such an annoyance. Yeah, that works. James eventually...
Why does everything have to result into violence? Like, I get it, the hunger and the need to be in power, but dang, like, there's no need to just brutally murder everybody.
wiped the Douglases from power and yoinked their land, and he was now in full control of his kingdom. Despite looking super spooky with his villain...
This drawing looks like kindergartner did it, but I guess that's just my opinion.
Vermilion birthmark covering half of his face like that one Avatar guy.
I was just about to say that. I was just about to say he looks like that guy from wrong anime. He looks like the guy from the Avatar, which I don't remember his name. I don't remember his name.
James was a very successful king. He was super social with commoners and advocated for advances in education, helping found the University of Glasgow in 1451. James was also a huge proponent of modern war technology, which, at the time, happened to be war cannons. These engineering marvels of bronze and iron were critical in besieging forts and castles, as cannonballs would just chew right through them things. While attempting to capture Roxburgh Castle, one of the last Scottish castles still under smelly English control after the Scottish Independence Wars, King James II positioned himself next to one of his prized cannons, and after a few words of encouragement to his bombardment buddy, the king gave the order. Artillery!
I'm just going to take a wild guess and say that he was killed by the weapon that he loved the most. He was either standing in front of it or too close to it. I'm just going to take a guess. I knew it. I knew it. I knew it. I called it.
The mounted metal menace exploded, killing King James II instantly at the age of 29. This rather unfortunate death was cemented in Scottish lore on August 3rd, 1460, and is officially, well, canon.
I see what he did. Stupid.
In the middle of the Capetian dynasty, the Kingdom of France was ruled by this guy, Louis VI, also known as Louis the Fat. Oh, which is just mean. He should be called Louis the Body Positive.
I can't.
Anyway, this big fat asshole had 8 kids, and this chapter is all about his eldest son.
What is up with this? What is up with this kid right here? Why does face look like that?
As was tradition in the Capetian dynasty to establish a clear lineage to the throne, young Philip was crowned as co-king of the Franks at the tender age of 13, right about the time when teen angst starts kicking in. Although reportedly Louis's favorite child, Philip was a bit of a stinker. He would refuse to listen to his father's authority, fail to pay attention to any of the king's lectures and set standards for being a king, and devolved into being a disobedient little shithead, as kids tend to be. According to Walter Mapp, a historic writer during that time period, the continued arrogance and insubordination of the spry little king made him, quote, a burden to all. You know, like when you see a small child convulsing on the floor of your local Target because a 36-year-old man-child snatched the last Pokemon Prismatic
My kid.
Evolutions booster
That's my
pack out
kid,
of their tiny little
100%.
ham hands while the parent just looked on in a dead stare? Hang in there, man. Even though a troublesome youth, the problem would soon fix itself. In October of 1131, at age 15, young King Philip was chilling with the bros, racing through the streets on their one-horsepower chooked-out
Why are you riding the horses like that?
was turned on its head. A small sable swine scuttled into the street, right in the path of the oncoming prince and his gang. Philip, who was leading the group, was catapulted off of his horse after it had tripped over the surprise pig. Prince Philip slammed into the ground in a devastating crack and crunch of bone, fracturing all of his limbs. Rendered unconscious. Tragically, the young king had succumbed to his wounds the very next day. King Louis and his family were stricken with immense grief over the loss of their son. The little piggy went to market, but it should have stayed home.
If you get taken out by a pig, Darwin's theory of evolution was not on your side.
George II, King of Great Britain, began life as a tiny little bratwurst in Hanover, Germany in 1683. His father, also George, was the first king of the Hanoverian era and a rather combative parent. Neither George liked the other and would always get into very heated and very public arguments over stuff like politics and other king things. But to be a little more specific, Small George despised his dad's advisor, Robert Walpole, the guy considered to be the first British Prime Minister and the one who was really pulling all of the political strings behind the scenes. Think Wizard of Oz, but with a smaller head and worse teeth. But one day, enough was enough. Big George banished Little George from the king's palace after a falling out. The prince was pretty okay with this. He and his wife lived in peace and quiet for quite a few years until, well, the king died. Time to go be a king. Prince George achieved his kingship in 1727 at the age of 43. Views of his reign as king were mixed. Despite squashing political uprisings, expanding the arts, laying the foundations for the Industrial Revolution, and overseeing many successful military conflicts, including leading his troops into battle himself at the age of 60, his English subjects just couldn't get over the fact that he was German, so, you know, they were biased. Growing into his golden years, age started to really take a toll on the king. By 1760, King George II was 76, blind in one eye and hard of hearing.
One thing that I've noticed, when it comes to like royalty and stuff, a lot of them age a lot faster, and I would have to assume it's the stress of being in power. I guess it comes with the territory, I guess.
In the wee hours of October 25th, the rather fermented monarch rose from his bed, drank his iconic 6 a.m. hot chocolate, and excused himself to the loo to force out his own hot chocolate. But it was here on his cushy secondary throne that things took a turn for the worse. A servant stationed outside of the royal chambers heard
Why
a
that
loud
toilet
crack
look like that?
before the door opened to find the root of the commotion. What he found was the king on the floor, seemingly having just finished his business. George was lifted onto his bed and tended to by his physician, but his body crapped out on him. The king was dead.
Literally.
An autopsy of the royal remains indicated that the king had died as a result of a thoracic aortic dissection.
Why can't doctors name things like diseases and disorders simple? Because I know for a fact people back then couldn't read, so not that they weren't smart, but they weren't that smart. So, like, why would you name something aortic dysestia?
What?
Whatever it was. Why would you call it that? What even is that?
First reported case in history. See that tear right there in the aorta? The big artery leading into his artery? Yeah, that's not supposed to be there. But how it happened is the question. And it is believed that the blood pressure required to cause such a rupture on an old man's already weakened heart came from a rather forceful push of the pelvic floor muscles. So, in an attempt to relieve himself of the intestinal burden, the king relieved himself of this mortal coil. Remember to stay hydrated.
Broke his heart with the shot. Where does he come up with this stuff? Broke his heart with the... Outside? Okay. Let mommy finish recording and we'll go outside. Broke his heart with a shark. That's a good one.
Hydrated. In a time where kings were given rather displeasing titles such as the Terrible or the Bad or the Slobberer, Martin of Aragon was granted the title of Martin the Humane. The gracious nickname was a testament to his kind and caring nature. He basically earned it by being a bit less murdery than any other kings at the time. I mean, all the guy did was reconquer... Alright, that's better. Alright, that's better. Sardinia, suppressed revolts, and led crusades against the Moors in northern Africa. But other than that, he's a perfect little angel, focusing on internal stability within his own kingdom of Aragon. But times of peace make for soft men. With little to no conflict to tend to in his later years, Martin grew older and wider. By 1410, at age 53, the king was rather rotund, wrinkled, and in a risky state of health, both physically and mentally. You see, his wife and his 4 children had died, leaving him all alone on his throne. He had married his distant and much younger cousin as a last-ditch effort to produce an heir, but with no success. The depressed and obese king had a little more to live for, and would instead gorge himself in solitude. On one fateful night, the king had just downed a whole roasted goose by himself. Where does he put it all? If you've ever slammed down a large meal too quickly, you usually get some pretty bad indigestion, or as I like to call it, the ERP. Since this was the land before Tums, the king had to sleep off his discomfort. Where does he come up with this stuff? The land before Tums? to his royal chambers and shimmied himself into his rather strong bed. To cheer himself up a bit, Martin clapped his greasy meat hooks together, summoning his court jester for some late-night entertainment so he could hop aboard the train to Sleepytime Junction with a smile, even though he had no idea what a train even was. The jester apparently took his sweet time while being summoned, as he was asked about where he was the moment he entered the king's chambers. And this was when all hell broke loose.
What the heck took you so long?
Well, now hold on. I can't in good conscience let this play out with at least putting up a disclaimer. What you're about to hear is the joke that supposedly ended a nearly 300-year medieval dynasty. You were warned. I was in the next vineyard, where I saw a young deer hanging by his tail from a tree, as if someone had so punished him for stealing figs. The king lost his absolute shit,
That wasn't
reportedly
even
slapping
funny.
his belly in laughter for 3 hours straight, eventually falling out of his bed and collapsing on the ground where he lay dead from an apparent heart attack. With no heirs to assume the throne, the House of Barcelona, after ruling the Crown of Aragon for 273 years, fell after the delivery of a single joke. Now, of course, historians debate if this story is even true, as some accounts have Martin dying of the plague, food poisoning, or complications from his weight. But those aren't nearly as funny. Archduke Alexander Leopold of Austria was a big dumb nerd. While the world of royalty focused on politics, land grabbing, and who could kill who more effectively, Alex instead played with his chemistry set in the corner, scribbling notes in a language called mathematics. It's no surprise that young Alex took a liking to the sciences, as his dad, Holy Roman Emperor Guy Leopold II, was a strong advocate for Enlightenment principles and the study of natural sciences.
Today's lesson is called gravity.
Whoa, gravity. But since he was still an emperor's son, involvement in politics was inevitable. Take, for instance, the Kingdom of Hungary. It wasn't officially part of the Holy Roman Empire, but it was somehow still ruled by it. There were governors in charge, but Emperor Leopold was all, here's my son. Make him do something. And thus, little Alex was elected into a lordship position known as a palatine. He had a pretty good time in that position, until the Jacobin conspiracy. A group of rebels were trying to have the Kingdom of Hungary break free from all Holy Roman Empire control, instead giving the royal crown to Alex. He very firmly said no, and the rebels were punished severely. With all of this political nonsense, Alex yearned for the simpler times of just mixing chemicals together to see what blows up. So in 1795, at the age of 22, Alex left Hungary for Vienna, Austria, and took up residence in Laxenburg Palace. But one summer, the young Archduke decided to turn up the heat and dabble in homemade pyrotechnics, a hobby that is famous for its safe and non-destructive nature. Expecting a visit from his cousin, Alex decided to rig up an extravagant fireworks display inside the palace. Hey, just cause you're educated.
Why? My question is why? I like, obviously he's smart, clearly. Why do it inside? Why do it in the house? I'm guessing he fucked around and found out. That's what I'm gonna guess.
Doesn't mean you're smart. To be fair, he, along with a few servants, set up the show within a fortified armory called a casemate, with the intent of firing the rockets towards the outside. So it's not like he decided to just shove firecrackers into a kitchen cabinet for shits and gigs. He was a man of science after all. Nevertheless, all gunpowder and makeshift explosives were stored inside the fortified walls. When his cousin arrived, he attempted to fire off the first rocket, but since Mother Nature has great comedic timing, a rogue gust of wind blew the rocket over, launching itself into the other explosives and gunpowder reserves. Everything exploded, engulfing the Archduke and his servants in a goodness gracious great ball of fire. Talk about going out with a bang, am I right?
I swear, I only read the first name and I didn't look at the rest of the words. Huh?
The title of king kinda just fell into the lap of old Adolf Frederick of Sweden in 1751. During the Age of Liberty, a time in history when the Swedish parliament was all... Adolf's rule as king was essentially worthless. He was no more than a political figurehead.
W fit, by the way. That fit is... It's a W fit.
While all the real guys in fancy wigs did the ruling. But apparently not very well, because by the end of the Age of Liberty in 1772, Sweden was kind of worse for the wear. Its land ownership had diminished, trade had evaporated, and technological advancements were lagging. So Sweden was forced to sit back and watch its neighbors and rivals proudly wave around their large, throbbing economies. During King Adolf's lavishly lackadaisical leadership, nothing extraordinary happened.
The substandard sovereign did attempt to regain power, but failed to do so, because he sucked.
In fact, his entire reign is seen as a dull but peaceful lull in Swedish history with not much to show for it. And unfortunately for the king, the only exciting point in his life, at least from a historical perspective, was his death. According to some historical records, the rather indulgent king had overindulged himself on some food. On February 12, 1771, the king's last supper reportedly consisted of lobster, caviar, sauerkraut, smoked herring, and champagne. Oh, and a few of these bad boys. This is a semla, a traditional Swedish sweet roll stuffed with almond paste and whipped cream, and hot damn does it look tasty. And that's exactly what the king thought as he inhaled 14 of them. Not surprisingly, all of that food did not sit well in the king's tummy, and all that internal stress is believed to have caused heart failure. The poor guy straight up ate himself to death. Now, before the actually crowd starts pounding away on their greasy keyboards, this tale of his death is regarded as propaganda and is highly discredited by modern historians. The official autopsy report for the king has survived all of these years and has concluded, based on all the evidence that they could gather from sleuthing around the king's insides, that his royal majesty had a stroke. Now, suffering from a stroke is rough, but for a king that wasn't up to par, it's a fair way to go. That's some golf humor for you. So there you have it. That's part 2 of embarrassing royal.
All right, that's gonna be the video. Shout out to Chat History for a W video as always. They do a really good job as far as like explaining history and historical facts. That's gonna be the video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.